I'm Brian Harper. I'm a PhD student at Indiana University, Bloomington, and I'm here because this is one of the few conferences that is particularly dedicated to misinformation, disinformation. Well, it's a new enough field, not too surprising, but it's an opportunity to actually have conversations with people who are involved specifically in this area rather than having to be sidelined in some other academic conference where you have to justify why it's important to care about Russian trolls. What I presented here was a piece looking at what happens when you do a cross-platform study on information that has been deleted. So what we ended up doing was looking at tweets that contained YouTube links, looking at ones where the YouTube link was to a YouTube video that was deleted, and then we observed what other YouTube videos they were connecting to, which were not deleted. That gave us a bunch of videos that we could look at. This was in particular from a corpus on anti-vax tweets, and that gave us quite a lot of videos that were adjacent to deleted content, which let us characterize what sort of things is on the periphery of the content moderation that's taking place on YouTube. How connected is it to anti-vaccine discourse, and how are they using these two platforms together in order to spread those views. It technically was just YouTube videos that were deleted. It didn't have to be from that, which did pollute our data source a little bit, but considering it was already a corpus of anti-vax tweets, it was pretty reliable. Right. It ended up having a network analysis involved, and any of those weird aberrations don't really show up very strongly in a network analysis because it's just not being supported as much as the core message of that they don't like vaccines for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, so these were, super spreaders, or these are just kind of bots, or some combination of all of the above?
Not really. The tweets themselves were really more of a complicated mixture of things. So in some cases you have individuals tweeting their own content. They're using Twitter for advertisement purposes. In some cases, regardless of whether the Twitter and YouTube content is similar. We had a real problem with someone who was tweeting that had incredibly extreme anti-vaccine, hardcore political tweets, and their YouTube videos were of them making dinner and working out. So we get weird platform interaction sometimes, but a lot of the time it was from relatively normal Twitter users, all things said. We obviously had some super spreaders where things were regularly retweeted and that was popular, but there was quite a good amount of just normal Twitter users that were effectively having conversations with each other using YouTube videos in order to support their views or argue against them. It fit a bit more into that Twitter as a site of discourse model than a lot of more recent Twitter interactions have suggested. On sort of a macro level recommendation, we suggest that the policies that have been constructed by social media platforms are really lacking in that they treat themselves like a closed space. And they obviously are not, and they know they are not, but their attempt to moderate misinformation policy would be much better if they had any acknowledgement of the existence of other social media platforms, and that could be something to help with their own internal policies. More practical concerns from a data design perspective, one thing we noted was that the YouTube context panel, which are the informational things that sometimes appear over controversial subjects like election denialism, COVID, those sorts of things. We found those much more regularly on pro-vaccine content rather than anti-vaccine content, which is not ideal because the intended purpose of these is to try to educate people, or at least provide some outlet for acknowledging that this is not the best, that there's more information from trusted sources to find elsewhere. Well, because it's so much easier to tag them as being related to vaccine content when they're pro-vaccine, because they have absolutely no incentive to conceal about the vaccine, and they're not going to conceal anything about what sorts of claims they're making. So they will talk about, this video is about the vaccine, it's in the title, it's in the description, all of the keywords are there. It is a trivial search problem to find those sorts of people. For people who are anti-vax and are cleverer about it, they're not going to do that. They're going to couch it in political terminology in the title, or they're just not going to mention COVID, the words anywhere, to make it slightly harder to search for, and then it just doesn't come up. And we've encountered cases that are concerning in that they're able to not get that little context bar. And really, it often just revolves around not using the word COVID-19 or pandemic. The other conclusion is that this approach of using other social media platforms to spy on other social media platforms actually worked surprisingly well, and it may be a way of solving multiple problems. So firstly, one of the critical problems for people in this space is attempting to resolve how can you look at information that's been deleted. We're looking at misinformation. If the misinformation is deleted by the platform, it doesn't exist anymore, and we can't do analysis on it unless we are embedded in that company, and then we're having to deal with NDAs. So this allows us to get sort of an echo of what once was and has already been deleted by looking at the stuff adjacent to it that sort of spreads outwards from it. So that's very helpful from a research perspective. Also, it suggests that these social media companies might be capable of augmenting their moderation approaches through covertly getting information about what other social media companies are monitoring. I mean, it might be easier if they just talk to each other, but I don't have tremendous hopes for them being willing to directly talk to each other. But using publicly available information to get a sense of what the moderation team on an opposing social media platform is doing, and then using that looping back to yourself to observe your own content, that might be some way of helping out their moderation efforts. More complicated, I'll admit, but this is actually the first in-person conference I've been able to attend since the pandemic, because everything else that has promised to be in person has then said no months afterwards. So I am very grateful to the fact that that did not happen here, and I'm physically talking to people in an academic conference again. I have missed that greatly. Not that I'm opposed to the sort of hybrid setup, but it is greatly appreciated, and if there are any funding people involved, please support actually having physical conferences again. It is a very different experience than trying to use a platform to replicate the ability to just have conversations with people where you digress into something totally unrelated and then discover that you have some minor shared research interest in common. It's just not possible to do that on a purely online interface.